I'm joined by Jermaine Clark, who's our Director of Intelligent Technology Consulting. Jermaine.
Thank you, Brandon. Happy to be here.
Happy New Year. I'm Brendan Howe. I'm the CEO of Techify. Jermaine and I have been doing a few of these, what we're calling hot TechTakes webinars. And we've been tackling our aim here is to give people some ideas, some tips about technology, basically do a monthly webinar series so people can keep up to date with the latest trends, what's going on with technology without having to invest a whole lot of time. I think everybody's got lots of stuff going on. It's been a crazy year, but we're into 2021. So just before we get going, a couple little bits of housekeeping. Usually these webinars go for about half an hour. Jermaine and I have some good content that we're going to go through. We're going to walk people through our top 10 list of technology priorities for 2021. If you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A panel. You'll see in the Q&A section. As you see, you'll also see a poll has come up. If you've joined us in the last minute or so, you'll see a poll there. We have a couple other polls that we'll ask as we go through the presentation, and then at the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions from the Q&A. Expect us to go about half an hour, and then we'll stay on for another usually 15 minutes or so and answer any questions that people have. Sound good, Jermaine?
Great. Ready for it.
All right. It looks like, based on our polling, that everyone wants to better utilize Microsoft applications and services this year. A lot of people want to move more to the cloud, train staff better, cybersecurity. Some people are thinking about implementing SharePoint. And the occasional person or company is looking at changing phone systems or upgrading ERP, and it doesn't appear like anybody's really looking at their CRM system. So, cool. So let's get started. You should be able to see my screen, and it's 2021, Jermaine. Happy New Year. Hey, it's going to be a great year. We've been obviously come off a year that was like no other. And I think we're all happy to move on to 2021.
Yeah, hopefully it brings a little more cheer than 2020. And we're all able to go outside and see our friends and family after that. So looking forward to it.
I think it's going to be a great year. And so today, what we wanted to talk about, we've got three themes for 2021. We figure, when we look at technology strategy for 2021, we feel we can put it into one of three buckets. It's either productivity, wellness, security, and business continuity. Now, originally, I recorded a video last week that was a bit of a preview for this, and we talked about just productivity, wellness, and security. But we added the business continuity piece because with everything going on in the world, we think it's pretty important to have business continuity in there, and it makes sense with security. It's kind of we think it's a match.
Definitely, yeah. The two are they go together for sure.
So, without further ado, let's talk about our top 10 list. So we're going to go through our kind of top 10 things underneath those three themes that we think everybody should be looking at for their technology strategies this year. Mm-hmm. Maybe not all 10 things make sense for your organization, but we're hoping that it'll give you some ideas. It will stimulate some good conversation and some thinking, and give you an idea of where other organizations are headed over the course of this year. So we're going to start under productivity, and we're going to start with the goal that we have for our clients this year. What we want to see for our clients this year is we want everybody to be able to save 4 hours per week per employee. If you could use technology, Jermaine, you've been talking to a bunch of our clients about this. If they can use technology and save 4 hours per employee, that'll have a big impact, right?
Huge, especially let's say you're a 10-person environment and you save 4 hours a person a week. then you're pretty much, that's an entire employee's 40-hour week. So it has a massive impact.
Yeah. So if we can do more and enable everybody to be more productive, then we're going to be able to take advantage of more opportunities. Or if we need to kind of do more with less, it'll enable us to do that too. Like you think about a 40-person company, that's 4 full-time people if we're using technology better. So that's the opportunity here. So let's talk about the how. So number one, very straightforward idea, hard to implement. Let's just not deal with technology issues. There's lots of people that think, hey, I got to deal with technology issues, right? I have no other choice. Technology, we're going to have the frustrations where it's just technology breaks. That's the deal. Well, our experience is that's not always the case. And you can dramatically reduce the number of technology issues you have if you have a focus. So here's how you do it. A lot of IT teams, providers, this is the how they end up dealing with IT, and it's not because they don't know what they're doing. It's a lack of process, a lack of proactive focus leads to you have an issue, it disrupts somebody's work, the issue gets solved, but then it gets repeated across the company with other staff. Like a simple example, say Sally can't print. She has an issue with her computer. She can't print. She talks to one of her colleagues. They don't know how to deal with the issue. She calls the help desk. The help desk logs in, fixes the issue. The whole exercise can take an hour to 2 hours if you include, the staff members frustrated and they go off and get a coffee afterwards and stuff like that. But then after Sally deals with the issue, then Jim, and then Frank, and then Martha across the company. And that's how you have these issues happening over and over again, because it only gets fixed for one person, and it only gets fixed for the person that dealt with it. So here's how you break that loop. When we have the issue, it disrupts work, we have the solution, and we add it to a best practices standard. And then the challenge is, how do we align that? How do we find out where that best practice standard is not aligned? So from our silly kind of printing example, maybe it's the type of driver, the setup, or how it works, and finding out where else somebody's potentially going to have that printing problem, whether it's across the company or from our perspective across our client base. That's a big part of how you can eliminate technical problems. And then Jermaine, your role in this is we end up finding these misalignments, and then we got to judge, is it going to be a big deal? Is it going to have a big impact on business?
Yeah, and that portion, Brendan, I mean, realistically, from when we talk about alignments, we really mean when we look at the environment, is it set up in a way that allows you to work most efficiently? And when we compare that to the business impact overall, we say, well, okay, well, we're going to address these business issues or printing issues across the organization. And then we're going to develop a strategy to ensure that those printing issues don't exist in the future. We had one client where they absolutely hated working with their resource printing company because every 2 weeks or so, there would be, nobody could connect to the printer. The key cards weren't working. They couldn't log in. And we worked with them, we figured out what the challenge was, and they ended up, I think he had a celebration at the end of his migration to 365 and SharePoint when he was able to cancel that print contract, and now he just prints without an issue, right? And we see that overall.
Yeah, and what everybody should be looking at this year, they should be able to see a graph like this. They should be able to see the number of tickets or support requests going down. Right. And it should be gradually, it should be, we're not doing a lot of skiing right now, obviously, but it should be like a ski hill. A beginner ski hill is fine, but it should be going down. So I don't want to get too hung up on this, Jermaine, because we got lots of stuff to go through, but this is something that you and I are super passionate about because we think it's such a great opportunity for people to improve the productivity of their companies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's go to number 2.
Yeah, so one of the primary things, the whole point of that ticket graph and looking at how we apply that strategy is really to reduce that overall time people are spending doing things other than their jobs, right? And if you tie that directly to productivity, the lower average number of tickets we see across our client base really for us reflects whether or not that productivity of the organization is higher, because they're not spending time at least on those IT issues. And when we talk about that productivity score, we really want to understand, looking at it, how are we getting the work done, and are we doing it the most efficient way? How are we communicating? Is there enough content collaboration? Is there enough mobility with the work? So as an example, Brendan and I talk about this one every time we prepare for a webinar. And we were doing it yesterday as well. We said, it took us a third less time than it did 2 webinars ago to prepare for this webinar, because again, we had the ideas, we knew where the content was in our content base, and we were able to work on them side by side as we went through in the same document, and everything was updated. So we're now preparing our webinars in 2/3 the amount of time that we did in our last 2 webinars. And that's a productivity increase.
And Jermaine, this productivity score is right in Microsoft, right? Like it's part of the Microsoft suite.
Part of your tenant, you can get a report pulled, super easy. We can show anybody how to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's some really interesting artificial intelligence technology that Microsoft uses so that you can look at how your staff are working. You don't have to I don't have to say, hey, Jermaine, are you using Teams? Are you using these different pieces of software? I can pull information and I can know who's using, how they're using, and get a good sense of, are we moving in that direction to save 4 hours a week?
Absolutely. And one of the key metrics here as well, when you think about it, is if you see something that's not being used at all in your environment and it's not included with your subscription, there's absolutely no reason to utilize it as well. Or you have an opportunity to say, hey, we can actually leverage this and utilize it, whether it's with our clients or our partners or internally to bridge that gap.
All right, let's go on to number 3. Here's something near and dear to my heart. It's time to ditch VPN and get to SharePoint. So this is something we've been talking about throughout the course of last year, and the pandemic just emphasized it, right? Like VPN can be frustrating. For whatever reason, it's an older technology, but it creates an extra step. You got an extra step. You got to log in to the server at the office. Sometimes when passwords change, it causes VPN issues, and it can be slower, less effective, bothers a lot of people. So let's just get rid of VPN. That's what we want to do.
With that in mind, though, I mean, I think you're shortening that span. You've had a vendetta against VPN since the end of 2018 into 2019. So it's been 2 years.
Yeah, I never liked VPN. But hey, there's this great thing called SharePoint that now when I want to access any of my documents, I can do it securely and through SharePoint, and it's included with Microsoft 365, and it gives us the ability to have all of our documents in place, gives us real-time collaborations. It's how Jermaine and I were able to work on this presentation together at the same time, and we're adding and deleting slides and other information as opposed to emailing stuff back and forth. There's a bunch of workflow. There's a bunch of you can use it for web portals. You can use it for intranet sites. There's huge opportunities. In fact, we're going to do a couple webinars. Our next couple webinars are going to be specifically on SharePoint.
Yeah, and one of the key things too there is getting those Power BI metrics or business intelligence. One of the awesome things that you can do, I mean, I know we talk about using this collaboration on the webinar, but we use it for every meeting. Every single thing that we're looking at, all the data that we get pulled, is centralized in a location that's secure and then feeds into the applications that are tightly wound into that framework. So there are lots of benefits around it. So I'm excited to do those upcoming webinars because it'll definitely add, in my opinion, some value to what we're talking about, especially from the ease of access part and getting rid of VPN, of course.
Absolutely. So Jermaine, you're a guy with a lot of style. Why don't you tell us about the next one?
Well, we want to automate like it's actually going out of style. And the reason for that, again, everything that we're doing currently is going to come back to how are we going to save that 4 hours? How are we going to make sure that each person can get rid of those mundane tasks doesn't really require somebody to look at, right? And we've got a lot of great ways that we can do that, right? One of the key things that you can do is, as an example, the old adage, how often or how much time do you spend trying to schedule something, right? You reach out to the person, oh, I've got these 2 blocks in my calendar that's available, right? Or I'm going to go ahead and send you some information. And one of the things that you can do easily is have a scheduling software available. You shoot the person a link and say, here's my availability, pick one that works for you, and just send me an invite. And it'll automatically do that, right? We want to automate getting lead generations for your business, right? There's a form, you click it on your website, the person fills out the information, it sends you all of the information collated into a single spreadsheet. Now you've got a clear way to view what you have incoming. Things like Power Automate, artificial intelligence for your planning, right? And just looking at overall, how many things did we sell last quarter? What should I stock for the next year? Or what should I be pulling in as my highest sellers, as an example?
Yeah. So Jermaine, we've been looking at it. The way that we've been counseling our clients is look at those manual repetitive tasks that you do, and let's see if we can automate them. Some will be harder to automate than others, right? I think you have a couple stories of
I
how
do,
we've
yeah. We've got one client in construction. Actually, both of them are in construction, but some of them do logistics as well. And one of the key things that they were doing was they would write all the information on a page. Somebody would take a picture of the page, email it to one person. That person would then type it into a Word document or the like, fill it out, and then give it to the next person that needed it, and so on and so on. They never knew who submitted which documents which day, and they had an entire person doing that. So very simply, everybody in the field has a tablet. They open it up. There's a forms that's created for each type of feedback that they need to get or data that they're collecting. They fill it out. It automatically uploads to their SharePoint. The person that needs to work on it gets a notification. That person knows that I've got 18 active open feedback lists that I need to review for that day. Very simple. API integrations, tying your current software that you have into each other so that they can communicate better, right? You've got 3 or 4 different pieces of software, but they all are autonomous. They have no idea to feed into each other. And we've got a client where we're working with them on that integration, linking the different parts of their logistics software to their hardware and availability of inventory. So that's something that's useful because you can click on it and say, okay, well, I've got inventory here, here, and here. And it makes more sense, right? It's automated.
Yeah, it's amazing when you start to think about just little things like you mentioned Microsoft Bookings, and this is just a view of Microsoft Bookings and kind of how it works. But even like that little thing of I've been able to remove a lot of back and forth with people outside our company about scheduling and just send a link and say, hey, here's my schedule. Book, here's my availability. Why don't we just book whenever it says I'm available? And it saved a whole bunch of time, right? Made me happier. Which, speaking of which, let's talk about wellness.
So that's a good one. I think I'm going to let you start with the wellness side because again, when we started the whole pandemic, everybody had started with the Zoom fatigue, the neck fatigue, the lighting fatigue. I've had so many phone calls with people that look like they're on the unsolved mysteries, and you can't tell if you're actually talking to the person that you're supposed to be because it's a silhouette. And everybody's come full circle. We want to be able to get up enough from your desks, get up and do some stretching, make sure that your mental wellness is in place. So I think this is a key one that everybody wants to address, especially if they want to get that productivity out of their staff and their team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we started like we were also concerned with what the economic and business fallout would be from the pandemic, that we started there. And now we're going into, we want to be more conscious. So we got a couple ideas here that you can put into your technology strategies for the year in terms of how you can use technology to basically engage your team better and reduce burnout, right? So I think our first idea here is enabling my analytics. So this is essentially right. It's built into Microsoft 365. Doesn't cost you any extra. You can just turn it on, and it's a self-coaching tool. So what each team member will get is a confidential look at how they're spending their time. And so the wellness focus, the well-being focus, there's suggestions that it'll give. It'll show you who you're collaborating with, how much focus time you have. It'll show you. It'll talk about quiet hours. It'll tell you if you're distracted unnecessarily by email. And there's a bunch of different tips that it'll give you via email, or you see the portal up on the screen here, that it can give members of your staff every week to basically make them happier with their worlds and how they're working, and give them some tips for self-coaching.
Absolutely. The other part of that too, now, if we move along with that, is how do we ensure that we're engaging our staff, right? Everybody started doing pretty much everything they could do online at the beginning. Now, just as disclaimer, we're not advertising for any of the upcoming companies on the slide, but some of the things that we've done for ourselves is we've engaged with polling through our software system to get people's feedback on what they want for the staff meeting meal. Right. We use Uber Eats Enterprise to be able to send gift cards once a month to our team so that they can purchase a meal and have the meal on the staff meeting during that time. And then simple things like Cahoots or Jackbox Party Mix. You don't have to do or use any of these, but there are tools out there that you can use to gamify things in your environment that would otherwise be super boring during a monthly staff meeting.
Yeah.
Right?
So speaking of boring, like our staff meetings usually went on, I would give a presentation, remind everybody of our goals for the year and priorities. And as Jermaine's fallen asleep there, I think it kind of bored the heck out of people. But I stole this idea from one of my kids in their class. They did Cahoots for math and social studies. And my kids were so excited about it. We tried it in our staff meeting, and I just put 10 questions into a Kahoot, and it was all related on our business plan, our goals for the year, and different things. And people loved it. They had all sorts of fun with it. And it was a great way to engage people and make our meetings a little bit better.
I still think some people had a preview to the answers, so we'll keep that one in house.
There's a little bit of competition. So speaking of engagement, we should probably do a poll, shouldn't we, Jermaine?
I think so. Why don't we find out what people are using?
Yeah, so let's we're gonna do a poll here. So you should have a poll popping up on your computer. Just curious to hear from folks about how they engage their team and what type of different tactics they're using. You can pick more than one. It's a multiple choice or multiple guess answer here. So we're seeing a lot of people using huddles. A lot of people have a lot of personal charisma. That's good to see. A lot of games, not as much polling. That's kind of interesting. Maybe that's an opportunity through Teams or to look at different poll tools. People are using check-ins, but everybody's doing something. So that's good to hear. Okay, so let's keep her going here. We're going to move on to our third and final theme here, which is security and business continuity. And what our goal here is, we want to reduce hacker risk and secure data. We've seen, every year it seems like we say, hey, we've seen an unprecedented number of attacks and breaches and stuff like that. But this year, with everybody, or not everybody, with a lot of people working remotely or working differently, we saw a huge jump in the number of email accounts getting hacked. And the biggest thing that I think we saw was people would get phished. So it used to be ransomware was the biggest thing that we'd see, right, Jermaine? People would click encrypt, and it still happens, and ransomware is still a big risk. But the bigger risk is we're seeing phishing, where people get credentials. They may sell them on the dark web. They may take them from the dark web to access systems, and we're just probably the biggest thing that we want to see people do this year is secure those accounts, secure your usernames, names, and passwords. So one of the ways that we can do this is by looking at what Microsoft has a security score. And we like these scores because they provide a good benchmark. They allow people, whether it's the productivity score or the security score, it allows you to measure your business against other businesses that are of similar sizes, right? We're not all IBM, right? But if we can measure ourselves against other businesses that are certain sizes and implement a process, you hear us talking about on a lot, like the process is the key, right? Continually improving your security strategy. And it involves reviewing, auditing, aligning, road mapping, and following that process over and over again. And when we're doing it with a security score, we can see where we're at. We can get, like, Microsoft actually makes it pretty easy. They give us a bunch of recommendations. Most of these recommendations, or many of them, don't cost any money, right? You just have to change settings, right? There's hundreds of settings on the back end of the Microsoft 365. Jermaine, I think gone are the days where I think people are getting to see that you can't just kind of move your stuff to Microsoft 365 and say, hey, we're secure, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you could put all your stuff in a safe and lock it up 20 years ago. Today, they'd come in, take the entire safe, and then just, open it up and go from there. And if we think about exposure and we think about, oh, I'm a small company, this doesn't really apply or otherwise, but let's look at something massive that happened worldwide. SolarWinds recently, in the last month and a half, had a massive exposure where the hackers went in through one of their own updates, a firmware and software update that they were applying. They applied a patch and entered in there. And as of yesterday, there's a fourth level of encryption leaking data out of places in the United States government, in Canada, across the world, in different platforms in manufacturing and everything. They're just harvesting and stealing stuff everywhere, and they keep finding those exposures. But I mean, we don't use SolarWinds currently, but you never know. We could have been on that same bandwagon and be exposed in a company that's been a worldwide company like that, right? So if the hackers are doing it and they're finding better ways to infect and get into everybody's pocket, we need to be doing the same thing for our own environments to keep them out.
Okay, so if there's one thing everybody should do this year, Jermaine, do you think it's number 8?
I think it's number 8, yeah. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our security webinar previously, and we wanted to keep it front of mind. It's one of the first things you can do. I think Microsoft has said that if you do this correctly and you just have multi-factor, not 2FA or no FA, like we like to call it, or single factor authentication. If you do multi-factor authentication and give that extra oomph to your login and your credentials, then you're going to get rid of 99% of the phishing ads. They can steal your credentials. They could give them to it on your telephone, and they still can't get in because they need to have something, which would be that admin password and username, but they also need to have something you have, like your mobile phone or a key card, and something that you are: biometric fingerprint, eye scan, Windows Hello. Check out your face scan, right? Before you can get into your machine. So it would be unlikely for them to have all 3 of those things. So if it's the one thing you do this year and you think about and you really consider, is don't worry about how much more cumbersome it's going to become for security, but implement it and then just work from there, right? Because that's going to help you a lot.
Yeah. 2 other things on the security side of things that I think we want to mention to people, and we could do full webinars on these alone. I think one is we've got all these devices. We've got our computers, we've got our tablets, we've got our mobile devices, and now even more so, people are working outside the corporate firewall. They're working all over the place. So we need to better secure these devices. So we need to look at ways, how do we put in place conditional access on these devices? So really what this sort of goes through in more detail how it works. But here's what we want to be able to do. If a member of our teams shouldn't have access anymore, we want to be able to revoke that access. Like say somebody leaves the company and goes to a competitor, or you have to terminate somebody. If they're working from home, you need to be able to shut down their access instantaneously. You can't be saying, hey, could you log out of your computer and please don't log in again?
Can I call you and watch you delete your email?
Yeah, we don't want to do any of that nonsense, right? Same thing if a computer got stolen. right? We want to be able to lock it down. So whether it's through device conditional access or user conditional access, you have multi-factor authentication built into that process. But those are a couple of the ways that you can really change the strategy so that you don't, it goes with people wherever they are. So we've got to move from this idea of security strategy where it's based on everybody working in the office.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 2019 or 2018 concept, right? We need a 2021 security plan.
And one of the things you want to add to that, which I don't know that everybody thinks about it, is, well, there's no longer a work device and a personal device, right? People are device conscious and they consolidate down. So they'll check their personal email on their work device, or they'll have to bring their own device policy where they install their email on their phones or their home tablet so that they can work a little later. So now you've got the bleeding of the security between the personal device and the work device. How do you control your information on either one, right? It's super important to think about.
So we're getting up against it. We're bottom of the hour, but let's go through one more here, Jermaine.
Yeah, this one's a big one for me. Especially with the ransomware, security exposures, data hacking, loss of email, any of that. We always want to have a backup, right? And thinking about whether or not you're going to back that up, whether you're on-prem, whether you move to device only, you're in the cloud, we've got to keep that top of mind and be conscious that we need to have some form of business continuity as we go along.
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of people have found through COVID is the more applications they have in the cloud, the easier it was to deal with people working from all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. So, and we saw in our initial poll, a lot of people are really looking to continue to accelerate that move to the cloud. If they have an ERP system on premise, they're looking at moving to the cloud. The file server is looking to move into SharePoint. Could be some people have on-premise CRM systems. Some people are using old versions of SharePoint. There's all sorts of different applications that are kind of on-premise based, and sometimes it depends on the vendor. But most vendors now have a cloud-based option.
And it's happening every day. We had a client, one of our own clients, message us earlier today saying, hey, we're indefinitely closing down our office because everybody's working from elsewhere and we don't need this additional equipment. Let's just consolidate down, remove and recycle all the old stuff. And if and when we decide to open an office space, which we most likely won't, we'll let you guys know. So we're still supporting them, but everybody's working from home now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and you can see how everybody can do that now, right? And it's not that complicated.
So, we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A as well that we definitely will get to in a couple of minutes. One of the last things that I want to talk about is when we think about how we're going to get to that business continuity piece after a disaster, right? Something happens, whether it's hacking, phishing, ransomware, accidental explosion of server on site, lightning storm. What we want to make sure that we have in place is a good way to manage that business continuity piece at the end. You got your servers and your storage. You must have some form of data replication elsewhere, external to your primary area of use. And then outside of that, a recovery process in place to ensure that you can consistently pick back what you need or restore what you have from your original working environment. And then you want to have that process, that network alignment, ensure that, hey, I have this in place, I've set it up. It's not set up and forget. We want to set it up, validate and test it, make sure that it's relevant and updated as we go along, and assess that risk management on an annual basis at a minimum. And then really think about internally at the organization, what is our policy and our strategy around ensuring that in the event of all of this happening, who's going to be contacted, who's going to take care of what, and do we have that one pager that will ensure everybody in our environment to work and have that business continuity piece going forward, right? Because recovery is one thing, but what do you do between when you have the incident to recovery? You need to be able to have that continuity piece in between.
Well, and the definition of disaster for disaster recovering is changing, right? Like a hack is a disaster. You get hacked. It's not just data loss, right? Like there's, or it could be embarrassment, or like there's all sorts of different versions of disasters out there. So having that kind of incident response plan, business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, however you want to put it, like they're different things and they traditionally have different definitions, but those definitions are changing all the time.
Yeah.
All right. So we've run out of time on the on your regularly scheduled programming, but we do. Jermaine and I will stick around for questions. We got a quick poll that would be great to just get feedback. We're always looking for feedback from folks that attend our webinars, so that we can make sure that we provide the kind of strong and relevant content moving forward to help folks. Speaking of moving forward, our next two webinars have been scheduled. February the 17th, we're getting lots of questions from people about SharePoint, and they want to know more about SharePoint. So we're doing a SharePoint 101, how to ditch VPN and boost productivity. So we talked about that. That's one of our priorities for folks for this year. And then in March, we're gonna go even deeper on the SharePoint side. We're gonna kind of do the 201 level, maybe even 301, and we're gonna dive into really why SharePoint's so strong that you'll never want to go back to a file server. You'll get so used to it, you'll enjoy it so much, you're not going to want to go back to a file server.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a few questions in our Q&A panel. Do we want to jump on one or two of those?
Yeah, let's do that. So if anybody, as we're doing that, if anybody would like to contact either Jermaine or myself, that is our contact information. Let me start. Jermaine, let's start. This is a good question. So Microsoft's MFA doesn't work consistently across all platforms, and it interferes with some devices. What do you suggest for this?
So there's a couple things here. In most cases, with the MFA scenario, it's usually a misalignment, right? So we're trying to turn on MFA when the rest of the environment isn't across the board in compliance, right? And when we look at that, what we've seen in the past is when we try to turn it on independently, definitely you can't sync your password to your mobile phone, or it works on two devices but not one, and so on, right? So what we do is, if your environment's migrated through to SharePoint and you're using Azure Active Directory and their endpoint manager through Microsoft, your multi-factor authentication is tied to that user, not the device. So what happens is every single piece of security settings, everything related to your environment is now user-centric, not device-centric. And because of that, you can log in anywhere and your MFA and everything will work, because you're authenticating the device via the user with your multi-factor authentication appliances, fingerprints, key card, USB, whatever.
Yeah, and I'd add, like, I'm impressed with how many different applications and services that MFA does work with. Microsoft MFA's works with, but there's always going to be stuff that it doesn't work with, and there's other ways, like there's other authentication tools. Duo is a good one that folks use. Or in some cases, you may want to just say, hey, if you can't give me the kind of MFA that we need, we're not going to use that application. Not always, you're not always capable of doing that. But that's another legitimate part that you have to think about, right? Like if the application you're using doesn't have the level of security that you need, people move applications on a regular basis so that they can get the kind of security they need.
And that's two good ways to look at it. Regardless of what type of multi-factor authenticating application or security service you use for that, it also depends on the applications that you're using in your environment, right? So whether you're using an RDS or you're using a cloud-based key, whatever the situation is, you can change your MFA to not be Microsoft MFA or Duo. It could be key card MFA specific to your environment. So that because you have scanners and you use things like that, you can use key cards against your computer. It's a tiny dongle that looks like a USB mouse clip. You put it in and you swipe the key card. So now that authentication's gone from being user to that specific issued card that is controllable by your organization, right? So there's a lot of things out there that you can do. Great question. Thank you.
I think we got, here's another good one. So, and you've kind of touched on this already, Jermaine. Instead of fingerprint, what else can I use? Additional forms of authentication?
Yeah, so that's the common one. I mean, I always reference the fingerprint one because when we log into our Microsoft and our computers, it asks me for, hey, can you approve this on your device? I hit approve and I think I'm done. And then it's like, well, can you also provide your fingerprint or scan your face? So you can scan your face. You can have a key card or a dongle that plugs into the device itself that you scan the key card against. You can use the fingerprint on the computer itself. A lot of the computers come with that chip in place. And you can also use Windows Hello. If you have a camera and your device is enabled with infrared, it actually scans your face, but not the front. So you can't put a picture up and sneak in. It actually scans the entire matrix of your blood vessels under your face. So it's kind of unique. It's a type of fingerprint, but it's a face print.
So that one is super cool. I love it. Like I have it on my Surface, and like I just open it up and it just sees me, and it's already a trusted device.
Yeah.
So I get my access through Windows Hello, and it's
it
like
works
it's
in the
faster
dark
too. So it's more secure. You know, it doesn't make fun of my face. It's more secure and it's actually faster. Like a lot of us think about security as, oh, there's going to be another level of security. It's going to be a pain in the butt. It's going to be harder to do things. But in some cases, you can put in place security measures that make life easier for you, make it faster.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's do, I think we got time for one more question. Let's do one more and then we'll wrap up. So we've got, let me see, last one here we'll do is, why are external backup services required for Microsoft? Isn't it already backed up by Microsoft? Like, isn't that the point of going to the cloud, that your data is going to be backed up?
Well, that's a fair question. And yeah, I mean, Microsoft definitely backs up everything that they do within their tenant, whether in Azure or in their Microsoft 365 tenant, SharePoint, Teams, whatever. The situation with it is that Microsoft backs it up at a location or a province level. So as an example, Microsoft data center in Ontario would back up every Microsoft account in the cloud that sits in that data center in Ontario. But let's say John Q Public has an exposure or a hacking and the email gets deleted for their specific user tenant only. Microsoft doesn't have an ability to restore that user tenant or to restore that file level user tenant. So now the issue is they're not going to restore their entire data center for every client in Ontario. What you need to have is something that's specific to your tenant that backs up only your information securely, separate from Microsoft entirely. So if Microsoft has an exposure, you have your contingency plan. And if Microsoft has a breakdown or you get a hacking and so on, you don't need to depend on Microsoft for it. You have your own service in place that's external that can be restored into that tenant. And it's funny that you say that. I've had 6 or 7 clients in the last few months who are all trying to get their cyber insurance adjusted for the new year. And they have to do an assessment. And one of the questions on the assessment, I had one just this morning, said, hey, what are you doing and what contingency plans do you have if your Microsoft data gets hacked, exploded, deleted, or otherwise? And they're like, you have to fill that out. Otherwise, they're going to charge you a mega premium on your cyber insurance because you don't have a contingency plan in place. So it's very important. Again, the reason is you're looking at a data center restore versus a user level client restore. And Microsoft's not, they recommend on their own website that you should have an external backup for your tenant.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of, that's a good spot to end on. One of the things I meant to mention as we're going through the security side of things, there's a new organization called Cyber Secure Canada that they've put in place 13 different categories or kind of expectations with a bunch of standards that they'd like to see across all businesses. And part of that, it's consistent with that Microsoft security score. It's consistent with the process around best practices standards. Getting up to that cyber secure level, Cyber Secure Canada level, we think it's something that's going to be a priority. I'm going 10B, or maybe this is part of 10, but we want to see our clients be able to get certified for that Cybersecure Canada. It's a voluntary thing. At some point in the future, it may not be voluntary anymore, but we think it's a good thing to do. And so one of the other things we're going to be talking to people quite a bit about this year. And you talking about that cyber insurance and going through those checklists just made me think about this. I think it's a really good thing that people should be looking at. So feel free to reach, if you haven't heard about it, feel free to reach out to us. We can tell you a little bit more about it.
And it's good
So,
that you brought that up. One thing before we head off there is that we've been doing that type of discussion with our clients over time, whether they're HIPAA or they need to be GDPR because they work in the UK, or they need to be NIST compliant because of the information security within Canada, the US, the UK. We've already been doing that over time. So having this type of a certification, it'll do wonders for your organization as a whole, because at least you'll have that peace of mind that you're meeting those expectations.
Awesome. Jermaine, thanks for joining me today.
It's been great, as usual.
And thank you everybody who joined us. Our next, so we're doing these webinars just as a reminder, the third Wednesday of every month, and we'll be doing SharePoint in February and then SharePoint in March.
Great. I can't wait until we do the COVID vaccination webinar. That'll be awesome.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.